Britain's next Prime Minister. The final two candidates are selected today as Tory MPs vote in their final ballot. One of the contenders, Andrea Leadsom, moved to dismiss criticism that she'd exaggerated her pre-politics career.
My CV is incredibly varied and it's all absolutely true. And, I think this is, ridiculous.
You the latest from Westminster as Tory MPs choose which two names should go forward to the party membership. Also this lunchtime. Tony Blair admits the flawed intelligence on Saddam Hussein should have been properly challenged. Protests as a black man is shot dead by police in the American state of Minnesota, the second such incident in 48 hours. Sad but proud, the Wales squad starts the journey home after the end of its dream run at Euro 2016. And the Williams sisters look set to dominate the ladies' semi-finals at Wimbledon.
In the south, a family's fight for change. 15 years after their daughter died, there's now new guidance for the NHS on treating babies with high blood pressure. And the rural row over building homes on a Bronze Age burial site.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. In just a few hours' time, we'll know which two names vying to be Conservative leader and Prime Minister will go forward to a final vote of party members across the country. MPs are currently casting their votes. The Home Secretary, Theresa May, is the frontrunner. Her rival contenders are the Justice Secretary, Michael Gove, and the Energy Minister, Andrea Leadsom. Mrs Leadsom this morning gave a campaign speech promising prosperity, not austerity, and described criticism that she'd embellished her CV as ridiculous. Our political correspondent Ian Watson reports.
This afternoon, 3 will become 2, the final shortlist for the most powerful job in Britain. Theresa May is way out in front with her fellow MPs who see her as the next Prime Minister. But it's the Conservative Party's members who'll make the final choice. She voted to remain in the EU. Her two opponents both backed Brexit. That's the ambitious Justice Secretary Michael Gove, a leading light in the Vote Leave campaign, and the Minister for, and indeed with, Energy, Andrea Leadsom. And with some figures suggesting that the French economy could be nudging ahead of Britain's, Andrea Leadsom's message was clear. Don't worry about leaving the EU.
Let's banish the pessimists. I want to speak to the markets as well as to the nation. No one needs to fear our decision to leave the EU.
And she, unlike her opponents, wants to fast-track our exit from the EU, leaving by next year. It sounds a bit like a revivalist meeting. Andrea Leadsom's supporters giving her a standing ovation. Her message was one of optimism, austerity out, prosperity in, she says. But the knives are out for Andrea Leadsom among some of her opponents. This key lieutenant of Michael Gove's had to apologise for sending a text to Theresa May's supporters trying to get their help to scupper Andrea Leadsom's chances. He'd suggested it would be frightening to have her in number 10. Michael Gove himself insisted he was fighting a positive campaign.
I think that the optimistic and hopeful message that we've been putting forward is resonating. So, obviously, we'll find out later this afternoon.
Do you think you can stop Andrea Leadsom?
I don't think it's about stopping anyone. I think it's about giving the Conservative Party in the country a choice of two people who could be Prime Minister.
And other opponents of Andrea Leadsom have been questioning her fitness for office and her seniority in the financial services industry before she became an MP, charges she tried to refute in a BBC interview.
My CV is incredibly varied and it's all absolutely true. And, I think this is, ridiculous. My CV is exactly as I've set it out.
The Home Secretary, Theresa May, has opponents too, and some of them have been wondering aloud if her diabetes would be a weakness in high office. But she's been stressing her strength as a negotiator, a key asset when taking on the EU Commission. Theresa May will almost certainly make the two-person shortlist today. Far less certain is which of her pro-Brexit opponents will join her. Ian Watson, BBC News.
Let's talk to Norman Smith, our assistant political editor, who's in Westminster for us. Norman, what is the mood now, do you think, as they whittle it down to the final two?
Well, Rita, Theresa May is almost certain to go through to the final ballot of party members, but the tussle really is between Michael Gove and Andrea Leadsom. Now, everyone knows Michael Gove. He's the former Education Secretary. He's the man who did in Boris Johnson. and maybe has done in his own prospects by doing that. But Andrea Leadsom, well, people don't really know her outside of Westminster. So today she tried to introduce herself to voters, presenting herself as the sort of sunny side candidate, the optimist, the confident candidate who was trying to reassure people it'll be fine with Brexit. All these messages of doom, none of it's actually happened. The banks are still here, the FTSE's doing fine. But what we didn't get today was any detail, any specifics, any plan, any policies. And we really don't have a clue what a Leadsom premiership would look like, which is why there's been this focus on her CV, because normally in these sort of contests, the contenders are sort of old Westminster war horses who've been round the block half a dozen times, and we all know where they stand, and we all know what they're about. But with Andrea Leadsom, she is pretty much a wild card. And the question is whether Tory MPs voting tonight decide that uncertainty. Andrea Leadsom, who is she? Maybe that will give Michael Gove victory in going through to the ballot with Theresa May.
Norman, many thanks. And the BBC News Channel will have full coverage of that result, and that's from 4 o'clock this afternoon. Tony Blair has admitted it would have been far better if the government had challenged the intelligence it was given in the run-up to the Iraq war. The Chilcot report found the assessments had been flawed and the threat posed by Saddam Hussein overstated. Mr. Blair said he'd believed the information he was given, partly because Iraq had already used weapons of mass destruction against its own people. Christian Fraser reports.
Through 8 years of occupation, and in the chaotic years since, Iraq has been torn apart. The terror attacks have barely relented. First Al-Qaeda, then Islamic State. Politically, it's never been more divided. In conflict and in the failed reconstruction that followed, 179 British servicemen and women were killed. For the families of the dead, there are 6 words in the Chilcot report out of 2.5 million that crystallise where it went wrong. I will be with you, whatever. The first words the British Prime Minister used in a secret memo to George W. Bush 8 months ahead of the conflict.
We were giving the United States a very clear commitment that we were going to be alongside them in dealing with this issue. How we dealt with it is another matter. Indeed,
no, it isn't, is it? Because of your use of the word whatever. Whatever.
I think you'll find that the next word I use is but.
But this is the moment, says the memo, to assess bluntly the difficulties. Tony Blair insists he was genuine in those attempts to get a second UN resolution supporting military action. Yet in that same memo, the two leaders discussed a date for starting the war. Getting rid of Saddam, he wrote, is the right thing to do. And Lord West, former naval chief and first Sea Lord when the war began, said he was told to prepare as far back as 2002.
In July of the year before, I was told by someone in Whitehall, I won't say who, that we would be almost certainly invading Iraq in the new year, in 2003. So my belief was that even at that stage, there was a sort of knowledge that we would be moving towards an invasion. And even though people might have been doing things to say, could we avoid it, that was where we were going. There was an inevitability about it.
The hawks in Washington, particularly the then Defence Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, thought the UN route a waste of time. Chilcot concludes that both sides put the case for conflict on flawed intelligence and with a certainty not justified. But does that give the families a course for legal action?
These young men and women were deployed on the basis of a falsehood, and now we've had the backing of Sir John with our beliefs, and it has now been documented, and it's given us a launchpad to go forward to search for, yes, more answers.
The lawyers say they'll need weeks to go through all 12 volumes of this report, but perhaps there is one conclusion from Sir John that will pose them problems. There was no secret commitment to war, he wrote. Intelligence was not falsified, and the decision was made in good faith. Christian Fraser, BBC News.
So could Tony Blair face a challenge in the courts? Well, let's ask our legal affairs correspondent Clive Coleman. Clive, how likely is it?
Well, I mean, let's deal with the criminal side of things first of all. Most lawyers I've spoken to think unlikely, but let's look at the possibilities. The crime of aggression, waging an aggressive war, that's not a crime under our domestic law, couldn't be tried here, couldn't be tried internationally, because although the International Criminal Court has agreed a definition of that crime, it said it can't be prosecuted until 2017, and when it does come in, it won't be retrospective. So under our domestic law, could there be a criminal prosecution? The most likely offence would be what's known as misconduct in a public office. That's when a public office holder misconducts themselves to such an extent that it abuses the public's trust in that office. And very interestingly, the former Director of Public Prosecutions, Lord MacDonald QC, writing in the Times today, has said that he thinks there is a possibility here, and he points specifically to confirmation that Tony Blair gave to Lord Goldsmith that Iraq was in breach of Resolution 1441. He's very critical, Sir John Chilcot, of that decision, because he says that there's no reference to weapons inspectors. Ken MacDonald thinks that could form the basis of a prosecution for misconduct in a public office, but a long way to run on any of this.
OK, Clive, many thanks. As protests continued in Louisiana over the police killing of a black man, Alton Sterling, another African-American has been fatally shot by police, this time in Minnesota. The victim, Philando Castile, was stopped in his car. His girlfriend said he was shot as he was reaching for his driving licence. You may find some of the images in Will Ross's report distressing.
He's licensed to carry. He was trying to get out his ID and his wallet out his...
The aftermath of a police shooting, live streamed by the victim's girlfriend.
He had a firearm and he was reaching for his wallet, and the officer just shot him in his arm. We're waiting for a back. I will, sir. No worries. I will. He just shot his arm off.
The police officer sounds like he's full of fear and panic.
I told him not to reach for it. I told him to get his hand out. And before he can let
the girlfriend is then handcuffed and keeps filming from inside a police car.
About 4 or 5 rounds was shot.
Her young daughter was with her throughout the ordeal, at one point calling out to her now hysterical mother, "It's okay, I'm right here with you." 32-year-old Philando Castile was taken to a nearby hospital, but did not survive the shooting. People close to him broke down when they found out. Minnesota police confirmed there was a fatal shooting in Falcon Heights City, but didn't comment on the video.
A handgun was recovered from the scene. The officer involved in this incident has been put on standard paid administrative leave.
Meanwhile, there have been 2 nights of protests in Louisiana over another shooting. 2 policemen pinned 37-year-old Alton Sterling to the ground. One draws a gun and several shots are fired. They're swearing as the officers move away. All too much for a teenager who saw the killing of his father on national TV.
He is 15 years old. He had to watch this, as this was put all over the outlets. And everything that was possible to be shown.
There are calls for justice as yet again the police use of brutal force, especially against black people, has been met with disgust. Will Ross, BBC News.
A man's pleaded guilty to the murder of a Glasgow shopkeeper. 32-year-old Tanvir Ahmed from Bradford has admitted killing Asad Shah in March. A judge heard that the 40-year-old was attacked because he claimed to be a prophet of Islam. Our Scotland correspondent Stephen Godden is at the High Court in Glasgow for us now. Stephen.
Rita, this morning the court was shown a video of the brutal sustained attack on Asad Shah. It was carried out by a man he'd never met. Tanvir Ahmed had driven from Bradford in a murderous rage, believing that Asad Shah had disrespected his faith. This morning a judge told him that there was no justification for what he'd done. Asad Shah, as most people knew him, behind his newsagent's counter.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
His place at the heart of this Glasgow community illuminated by the reaction to his violent death.
Every morning we shook hands and said, "Good day, have a nice day," and, you know, just a pleasant, lovely lad.
He was a very nice and happy, man.
It was Easter weekend when Mr. Shah was found lying in the street outside his shop. He'd been stabbed and beaten, injuries that proved fatal. His attacker was Tanveer Ahmed, a taxi driver from Bradford, who today, in a Glasgow courtroom, pled guilty to his murder. His motivation is contained in YouTube clips like this, typical of those posted regularly by Asad Shah.
Love, respect with each another.
Watching and listening in West Yorkshire, Tanveer Ahmed believed that Asad Shah was claiming to be a prophet. In Ahmed's eyes, that made him guilty of blasphemy. So he got in his car, drove 200 miles before confronting and killing the shopkeeper. Afterwards, Ahmed sat calmly in a bus shelter waiting to be arrested. Asad Shah's brother had tried in vain to protect him.
I really don't have any message for that monster. He basically took away a person who was peaceful, who wanted unity in the world, who wanted the communities to unite. Him harming someone of peace is literally, he's the enemy of humanity.
As Mr. Shah's family struggle to understand their loss, his killer is facing a life sentence. Well, Asad Shah's family say they are now living in fear. They are Ahmadi Muslims. They fled Pakistan 20 years ago to escape persecution and came to Scotland. Never did they think that they would face such danger on the streets here.
Stephen, thank you. The time is 16 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. Britain's next Prime Minister. The last two candidates are selected today as Tory MPs vote in their final ballot. And still to come, China's worst floods in a generation claim nearly 200 lives and leave more than 1 million homeless.
And coming up in South today, the need for new homes in rural areas. But should they be built on a Bronze Age burial site? And Wimbledon glory beckons for Southampton's Gabby Taylor. We'll have the latest on the teenagers' bid for the girls' singles title.
There's a warning this lunchtime that uncertainty over Britain leaving the EU could hit the recruitment of overseas nurses to work in the NHS. A report by the Institute for Economic Studies warns that 1 in 3 nurses will reach retirement age in the next 10 years. Currently, overseas recruits make up 13% of the NHS nursing workforce, with a third of them coming from the EU. Our health correspondent Adam Brimlow reports.
The NHS has always relied on overseas nurses. They make up more than 10% of the nursing workforce. Demand for their skills is growing here and around the world. In the last few years, the numbers from European countries working for the NHS have risen dramatically. But experts say the vote for Brexit could change all that.
EU nurses already working here will already be wondering what their status is. It's not been guaranteed. What are their rights as workers? Some might already be thinking of going back home. If NHS trusts are looking to recruit in Europe, that's going to be much harder now.
This matters because 1 in 3 nurses in England will reach retirement age in the next 10 years, making shortages worse, particularly of district nurses. Many trusts already look beyond Europe for recruits heading here to the Philippines or to India to sign up more nurses. A few months ago, warnings in the report published today helped persuade the government to grant up to 15,000 visas over the next 3 years. But the report concludes the long-term solution must be more investment in homegrown nurses. Nursing leaders say they've been warning about shortages for years, and they say planned changes to student funding will make the problems even worse.
And it underscores everything we've been saying about the need to get workforce planning right and to plan for the long term, not be dealing with short-term knee-jerk reactions, which is what the government seems to do all the time.
The Department of Health in England says more nurse training places are being created to deliver a safer 7-day NHS. Adam Brimelow, BBC News.
Meanwhile, Marks & Spencer says it's seen a sharp drop in clothing sales, with its chief executive citing weak consumer confidence ahead of the EU referendum as a reason. Sales were down nearly 9% in the 3 months to the end of June, while like-for-like food sales fell by almost 1%. The company warned it was operating in uncertain times. Our business correspondent Emma Simpson reports.
Sales signs galore. It's been a soggy summer so far, and fashion retailers are trying to shift the mountain of clothes they haven't been able to sell. Marks' sale is later than usual. It's also reduced the number of promotions and it's been cutting prices. All this is largely to blame, it says, for the big slump in sales. Marks & Spencer says it's going to hold its nerve and that its new strategy is the right one for the long-term success of the business. But, like other retailers, it will now have to deal with the implications of Brexit. The new boss says it's too early to judge the effects, but that consumer confidence had weakened in the run-up to the referendum.
Retailers don't like uncertainty, consumers don't like uncertainty. It makes them worry about where things are going, and that's where we are at the moment. And this uncertainty is going to persist well into the autumn, and that could well impact on consumer confidence and how much people are prepared to spend, in spite of the fact they're actually a lot better off at the moment than they were this time last year.
Sports Direct saw a sharp fall in annual profits today, and it warned its business was likely to be hit by the fall in the pound, as it would impact its buying power overseas. At Primark, sales were up. It also warned its UK profits could suffer from a weaker pound, but several other businesses have said they'd benefit from the recent slide. It's still very early days to try to assess the Brexit effect on our high streets, where the going for most is already tough. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
Earlier we were hearing about the Tory leadership campaign. Well, let's cross now to the latest on the row in the Labour Party and go to our political correspondent Vicky Young, who's at Westminster, where senior party figures have been holding talks on Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Vicky, this time last week it looked like Jeremy Corbyn was facing a coup. Where is he now?
Well, the party is still deeply divided. A little bit earlier, I spoke to Len McCluskey, the leader of the Unite Union, who was entering Parliament. He said to go and speak to senior figures. He hopes there can be some kind of a deal that could be negotiated by the unions to try and break this deadlock. Now, he said that talks had been productive so far, but he also said Jeremy Corbyn is making it clear that he's not going anywhere. So the appeal from Mr. McCluskey was for more time, for those who have said that they would launch a leadership challenge, for them to hold off a little bit longer. Now, almost immediately, Owen Smith, one of those MPs who says he will challenge or would consider challenging Mr. Corbyn, he said that he was happy to give a little more time, and he raised the possibility of the Labour Party splitting unless it could heal those rifts. We haven't yet heard from Angela Eagle. She's considering a challenge. We'll have to see what she decides to do. But I have to say there is not an awful lot of optimism amongst Labour MPs that they can bridge this huge gulf between them and the leadership, and no idea really about what exactly this deal would entail.
OK, Vicky, thank you. Vicky Young there. A huge rescue and relief operation is underway in China after a week of severe rain and flooding along the Yangtze River. Nearly 200 people have been killed and more than 1 million forced from their homes. 2/3 of the country has now been affected, with roads blocked and entire communities cut off. Our correspondent Robin Brandt reports now from one of the worst affected areas in the city of Wuhan in eastern China.
In a single night, Nanling became a town submerged. A smattering of trees poke out, but the water is everywhere. Save for those who fled to the safety of the third floor, the town was near deserted when we arrived. The water was very deep, he told us. It came too quick for us to react, this man said. And for those who can remember, it's been the worst flood in a generation. The last time it was this bad was the 1980s, according to this man. The president has ordered more troops for the rescue and relief operation. 2/3 of the country has now been affected, and the scale of this operation is immense. Standing in water just a few steps down from dryness, China's Premier Li Keqiang saw for himself the swollen rivers that have forced more than 1 million people from their homes. We spent the day following the mighty Yangtze River from east to west and ended up here at a waterlogged crossroads under a highway.
This intersection should be bustling with people heading home in their cars from work. Aside from a few brave ones, or you might say silly ones tonight, there is no one here, and that's because they have had a record amount of rainfall in this city, the most in their recorded history.
Just a few hundred yards away, this was the scene that greeted some at Wuhan's main railway station earlier in the day, and the city remains on red alert for more to come. The death toll is creeping up, but there are dramatic moments of near miraculous rescue. In the southern province of Guangxi, a woman was swept into a river, where she clung on for more than an hour. The first attempt to rescue her with a line of rubber rings failed, but eventually she was pulled out and hauled to safety on a small boat. Dozens have died, but she survived, just. Robin Brandt, BBC News, Wuhan in eastern China.
No, it was heartbreak for Wales in Lyon last night. The last home nation left standing in Euro 2016 was knocked out in the semi-final by Portugal. But it was the best ever Welsh performance in an international competition. And tomorrow, fans are expected to flock to Cardiff, where the team will parade through the city centre in an open-topped bus. Sally Nugent is in Lyon for us this lunchtime. Sally.
Rita, Wales are the team that dared to dream. They play teams bigger than them and more experienced than them without fear. It is a philosophy that really worked, and it got them all the way to the semi-finals last night, as Howell Griffith reports.
Journey's end, time to seek solace after a tournament where Wales grew from novices to national heroes. Having sung their way through 6 games, savings and emotions are all spent.
Bye-bye, France. Bye-bye, France. Au revoir. Au revoir.
It's time to go home.
Pretty gutted, but obviously really proud of what they've done. It's an absolutely amazing experience.
It's an underdog story that everybody loves. Iceland, everybody backed them because they were the underdog, and I think everybody's backed Wales for the same reason.
In the biggest game in Welsh football history, they couldn't quite reach the same level as Portugal. But Wales's motto throughout has been together, stronger. Victory and defeat, all shared with their fans.
Proud of this team, of any team I've ever been involved in, because I know what they've sacrificed to get to this stage. I think they'll probably end up going back to Cardiff to a nice welcome, and they deserve that.
Wales may have tasted defeat here in Lyon, but there's been so much to savour about their time here in France. They've not only made history, they've offered real, genuine hope for the years to come.
Wales will bring back unprecedented winnings from the tournament too. Millions that can be invested in the game.
If they keep improving, which I think they will, and with Chris in charge, I think they'll certainly qualify for the World Cup in Russia, and then it's a case of how far we can go then.
By tomorrow, these fans will find their voices again. A homecoming in Cardiff is planned, and the next journey can begin. Howell Griffith, BBC News, Lyon.
Well, the next part of that journey is potentially qualifying for the World Cup in Russia in 2 years' time. If they get there, who knows what they might achieve then. But before all that, there is a party in Cardiff tomorrow night. Rita.
Sally, many thanks. Well, at Wimbledon, after last night's thrilling match, which saw Andy Murray make it through to the Final Four in the men's singles, today it's all about the ladies. It's semi-finals day for them, with the Williams sisters, Venus and Serena, still on course to meet in the final. Daniela Relf is there for us now. Daniela.
Well, Rita, there is something of a vintage feel about the women's semi-finals here at Wimbledon this afternoon. There is not a teenager in sight. Out on court, there will be a 28-year-old, a 29-year-old, a 34-year-old and a 36-year-old. The oldest amongst them, Venus Williams, who has overcome years of problems to make it back into a Wimbledon semi-final. There's been a Sister Act revival. As children, there was the relentless practice on the courts of Los Angeles. Today, they're both semi-finalists at Wimbledon. But for Venus Williams, it's 8 years since she won the championship. Years marked by ill health, a loss of form and missed tournaments.
Venus Williams is the champion once again for the 5th time here at Wimbledon.
You just have to believe in yourself. You just have to. There's no way around it. You've got to believe in yourself. No matter how things are stacked against you, you just have to every time.
17 years old, her Wimbledon debut. Venus Williams lost, but prophetically said she'd be back. She went on to win 5 singles titles. She's now 36 years old, the second oldest woman to reach a Grand Slam semi-final. Physically and mentally, still able to compete at the highest level.
Venus Williams is, to me, the symbol of
going through adversity and having grit and coming out on top. She's handled it all with grace, with dignity, with class. She's been a leader for the women's tennis on court, off court, and here she is at 36 with a chance to win major number 8.
On court this morning, the juniors, hoping for their own Wimbledon title. But if they're to match the Williams sisters, they'll need to still be playing here in the year 2036. Well, it is currently Serena Williams who is out on centre court playing the Russian Elena Vesnina. She is currently 4-1 up in the first set. And today is also the start of the singles in wheelchair tennis. And it's the first time that wheelchair singles has been played here at Wimbledon. Rita.
Daniela, many thanks. Let's look at the weather now. Here's Louise Lear. Louise.
Hi there, Rita. Well, not just blue sky and sunshine at SW19, across London, actually, it's improved quite nicely. But that's not the story everywhere. Unfortunately, further north, we've got rather threatening looking skies in Halifax, in Yorkshire. The cloud thick enough for the odd spot or two of rain. There's a weather front slicing the country in two as we speak. And to the north and south of that, there's some blue sky and some sunshine coming through. And it's feeling pretty warm due to a southwesterly breeze. But that weather front stubbornly sitting through the spine of the country, and it's really going to produce outbreaks of light drizzly rain through Wales and the southwest in particular. So that means up into the northwest of Scotland here a scattering of showers, but some decent sunshine into Scotland, Northern Ireland, and we will see temperatures perhaps into the low 20s. Yes, some outbreaks of light patchy rain across Wales, particularly through west-facing coast, some poor visibility here and into the southwest, and the cloud thick enough for the odd spot or two of nuisance rain, not enough through the gardens really across Midlands and Lincolnshire. Into the southeast, keep the sunshine. You get some warmth, 24 degrees, maybe 25, not out of the question. But through the evening, the potential for some sharp, possibly thundery showers, fleetingly moving through the southeast. So that may well interrupt play for a time at Wimbledon. And then overnight tonight, we see a real rash of sharp showers develop to the north and west. Some of these really quite torrential at times. But it will be a pretty mild night for sleeping, 13 to 16 degrees. So a really messy start to Friday morning. It'll be warm, but it'll be wet at times. Outbreaks of showery rain spilling our way south and east. But into the afternoon, what a difference, a real contrast. Drier with some sunshine coming through. And because we've still got the wind direction from a southwest, warm with it. High teens, perhaps low 20s, not out of the question. Now, we keep that messy theme, I'm afraid, into the weekend. A rather deep area of low pressure for this time of year. Windy with it as well for Saturday. That's going to sweep in during Saturday morning. Some of that rain will shift its way further north. There's a level of uncertainty just where that rain is likely to sit into Saturday, but it looks likely to push its way across Wales, northern England and Scotland. To the south, it stays somewhat drier and brighter. So plenty of sporting events and summer events taking place this weekend. It looks as though we will continue to see showers or longer spells of rain at times. Wimbledon, though, looks predominantly dry. Rita.
Louise, thank you. In the last few minutes, we've heard that 5 men have died after an industrial accident at a recycling site in Birmingham this morning. There are reports a wall collapsed. Another man has been taken to hospital with serious leg injuries. The Health and Safety Executive has begun an investigation. There'll be more on that on the news channel very shortly. Well, now a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. Britain's next Prime Minister. The last 2 candidates are selected today as Tory MPs vote in their final ballot. That's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.